Hi everyone, welcome back to Cabin Crafts and Simple Living, and today I thought I would teach you a early American art form called Theorem painting, and it's spelled Theorem, Theorem painting, and these are some new ones that I have at home from a dear lady that I used to sell hers in my store, but she no longer wholesales, but she still does sell them. Her name is Carole Behrer, and you can see her signature right there, Carole Behrer. But what Theorem painting is it's stenciled painting on velvet. So this is a velvet. This is on velvet. I don't know if you can see the fibers of the velvet there, and then she hand grains the frames, and this is vinegar graining, and that's another whole lesson, and I'm actually trying to get that licked. I just can't seem to get the consistency right to be able to do this properly, but I will eventually get it. But this was also very popular to put with Theorem paintings. So I have two of them here. That's a set that I have hanging in my house. Here's the other one. So what these are is stencils. She cuts her own stencils. So this is stencils on velvet. So here's this little bird and this little bird, and these are both hanging in my house, and I just think they're lovely. But I wanted to try to demonstrate that for you all today. And I do not have velvet, but I have, this is just muslin, and I have an actual early American stencil here. These stencils are from mbhistoricdecor.com. Now this is a basket. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these. Theorems were, they're called a schoolgirl art. They were in the early 1800s. They started in the late 18th century in Europe, and then it made its way across the pond to America in the early 1800s, around right around 1800. And it was taught in finishing schools for girls. And what finishing schools was wealthy young ladies at the age of 16. Once they learned their basic education, they could be sent off to a finishing school where they would learn how to do needlework and theorems. And they watercolored on wood and made beautiful sewing tables and work boxes and things like that. Of course, they made the samplers that you see that's so expensive. They were full-time. They usually were a boarding school, and you would learn charm classes too. You would go to New England, mostly is where these were, and you would have charm class, and you would learn how to set a table. You would learn how to walk, all the ways to behave properly in public. And so that's where they would learn a lot of these things. And so theorem painting was easier and quicker way to show your skills that even a child could do it. So we're going to do this today, and I left my my brushes on the other side. Now I'm going to go grab them real quick. So like I said, I have an actual, this is from around 1800. And they were mostly baskets of fruit. That's what the theme was for those type of paintings, was a fruit basket. But of course they've evolved. So this is a two-layer stencil. I know it's hard to see because it's a white stencil on muslin background, but hopefully you'll be able to see this. And I might need to move my camera slightly. So I have I'm going to have three different colors on this stencil. It's two overlays, three different colors. So I'm going to start with, if I can get my other stencil brush out here, the basket. And I got just a brown paint for that. And if I know I've had other videos on stenciling, but you're going to need stencil brushes, and this is a stencil brush. I've got three different ones. You're going to need paper toweling. You're going to need your acrylic paints, and of course this is on muslin. I'm going to tape this stencil down so that it doesn't move while I'm stenciling. I just got some frog tape here. I'm going to stencil, or hold it down to stencil. So this is a very early American craft, very historic, okay? And so I'm going to go into my brown paint. Now, the thing about stenciling, is you take off most of the paint or it will bleed. So let me see if I can get this here. Here's my ugly paint palette. This is years old. I've just dabbed my paintbrush in there, barely. And then I'm going to take most of this off on my toweling because it will really bleed on fabric. And I'm just going to, and it's going to make the table shake, and I'm just going to pounce. And you're going to get different values of shade as you go. And this is going to, like I said, because it's on muslin, it's going to probably bleed a little worse than it normally would. Because velvet is a lot thicker. Sorry for the bouncing camera. So if you need more paint, you go in, get more paint, and take it off. And you'd be surprised how much is actually on there still when you take a lot of it off. And like I said, this might not be the best medium to work with, muslin, but this is just a demonstration. You can go get velvet at the fabric store, so if you want to do it the real way, and they would have used oil paints. And I believe Carole uses oil paints too. And while I was doing the research on the finishing schools, I was surprised to learn, in history, we're taught that almost all black folks were slaves and they didn't have access to things like this, but there were actually black finishing schools for black young ladies to learn the exact same thing. And they would have had black teachers. So I thought that was cool, that some of these young ladies of color could also get a finishing school education. Okay, so now the other thing that's the overlay on this stencil is the flowers. And I'm going to do those in blue. So I'm going to do these in blue, these buds. And then we're done with the first stencil. Okay, so we're going to peel this off and reveal a magical surprise. Look at that. Isn't that cool? All right, now we're ready for stencil number 2. And I've got to find where, these usually have a dot on them that you mark with a pencil, and I did not do that, so let me do that. You probably can't see it, but I'm going to line this back up because this will help us to lay down our next stencil. And I'm just going to get a pencil, and there's little dots. There's one, and there's one. And we line those up then with our next stencil. So now these little dots, there's that one there, lines up with this dot, and the bottom dot lines up with that dot. And now we're going to tape this one down. And this is mostly our greenery that we're going to be stenciling, and then the rest of the basket. So I'm going to go ahead and do the basket. The rest of the basket. And it's going to be like the cross pieces. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this. And some values will be darker and some will be lighter. But you saw when I took off the first stencil how neat it looks to have that overlay, or those darker and lighter colors. It's almost like shading. Because this soaks into the muslin so fast, I have to do my brush quite often. There's a little round circle right there. And one on the other side. And then we've got the bottom. You might not be able to see that. I don't think I could get it all in the... And then there's these little guys across the top. And they maybe they're supposed to be green, but they're going to be brown. Because they are all very even, like the top of the basket, like the braid. Okay. Now our next color is green. And I'm just going to go ahead and use my brown to go into the green. And we'll just go right up the middle. Get some of these leaves while we're at it. I think they should bring, believe it or not, I have a funny story. Whenever I was in the 8th grade, my mom and dad, I've told you all this before, my mom and dad in 1976 pulled me out of public school because they didn't like what I was learning. Believe that. They would roll over in their graves if they saw what kids were learning now. And with great sacrifice, they enrolled me in a little private Baptist Christian school. And in the 8th grade, I had to take charm class. And at the time, I hated it. And I was so aggravated because I was such a tomboy. And I got in trouble because I was snickering during one of the lessons. And the teacher made me go to the chalkboard and write on the chalkboard in front of all the other girls the definition of femininity 15 times. Because I was making fun of charm class. But you know what? I look back now, and I might not always use it, but when I need to, I know it. And in that little Christian school, they made the boys hold the doors open for the girls. They had the boys carry our books for us sometimes, if we had a lot in our hands. So while the girls were in charm class, the male teachers were teaching the boys gentleman's class. And there was 19 in my class, my little class. And we were all just like brothers and sisters. There wasn't really any, there was one boyfriend, girlfriend couple out of the whole class, but for the most part, we were just great friends and more like siblings. And I'll never forget how nice it was to have somebody open the door for you and carry your books. All right, we're done. This was a very simple stencil. Now this is actually a wall stencil. So let's pull it away and see what we have. And look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So, can't see the very top. Let me swing it up there. There's just one little bit. Now on Carole's painting, you can see sometimes, she didn't do it on this one, but I think she did on this one. Maybe not. But sometimes there's details with, that they outline things with. I'm going to slide this down. And I'm going to take a Sharpie. And I'm just going to lightly outline one side, and then it would be on this one, it would be the other side. Now they would have done this with a very fine paintbrush. And you just give your painting some details with a Sharpie. And I just try to think of where, maybe shadow lines would be. Think about in shading, when you're shading a painting. Just real quick. And now you can see how fast this went. And I'm not going to do the whole thing, but you get the idea. You can just put some, little details on things. And it makes it really pop. Especially on your flowers, maybe on one side of a stem. Isn't that pretty? So there we go. That is Theorem painting. As I said, it would have been done on velvet and would have had these beautiful vinegar grained frames. And I'm going to get that accomplished, and then I'll do a video on vinegar graining because this was a very popular thing to do on doors, fireplace mantles, all sorts of woodwork. In fact, Carole was hired to do a whole farmhouse museum up in Herman, Missouri. She grain painted every door and every fireplace mantle in that farmhouse. She said it killed her. And I wouldn't doubt it. It's very labor intensive on a large scale. But you can see back in early America, they would do mahogany graining. They would do figured maple. They would try to imitate various woods because people couldn't maybe afford these expensive woods for the woodwork in their home, and so they would faux grain their wood, and it would be done on chests, on furniture, all sorts of beautiful things. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video about theorem painting, and thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe and comment. That helps my algorithm, and I really need a lot of help with my algorithm, trust me. So please comment or give it a thumbs up, or subscribe, and please subscribe. That would help me too. But again, thank you for watching. Bye.